Good afternoon. My name is City Councilor Ed Flynn, and I'm Chair of the Committee on City and Neighborhood Services. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law in relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public space that is open and physically accessible to the public, the City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on www.boston.gov/citycouncil-tv. It will be rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. Anyone that would like to testify on this matter, please email Cora, C-O-R-A, .montrod @boston.gov for the Zoom link. Today's hearing is on Docket 0908, order for a hearing to discuss ways for the city to increase communication access for people with disabilities to public-facing television. This matter is sponsored by myself and Councilor Julia Mejia and was referred to the Committee on City and Neighborhood Services on August 18th, 2021. At this time, I'm joined by my colleagues, Councilor Mejia, Council President O'Malley, and I think at that time, this is all we have. I will get to my other colleagues when they do arrive. I'd like to offer an opening statement and then hand it over to my co-sponsor, who is Councilor Mejia, and to the other city councilors, and then we'll hear from the panelists from the city. After that, my colleagues and I can go into Q&A, and also we have public testimony. But at this time, let me also recognize and thank the administration panel that is here with us now. Commissioner Krista McCosh, Disability Commissioner, Commissioner Emily Shea, who's the Commissioner of Age Strong, and Susan Helmley, Program Manager, Human Rights Commission. We also have a community panel as well. And those that are testifying as part of that panel include Bill Henning, who's the Executive Director of the Boston Center for Independent Living, Lori Sedman, my Ombudsman, Director of Deaf Services Disability Policy Consortium, Wesley Ireland, who's a member of the City of Boston Disability Commission Advisory Board, Alex Gray, who's a well-respected disability advocate across the city. Please note that there is also an ASL interpretation available for this hearing, and it would be great if our panelists can speak slowly and clearly. At this time, I will give my opening statement, and then I'll ask my colleagues to follow me. This hearing is filed in partnership with the City of Boston Disability Commission, which would discuss ways to ensure public-facing televisions provide closed captioning for persons with certain disabilities, so that we can expand communication access through public-facing television and ensure that persons with disabilities have full access to information and resources shared to the public. Television in public spaces have often played an important role in conveying information to the public. Unfortunately, many of these public-facing televisions do not enable closed captioning and therefore are not accessible to persons who are deaf and hard of hearing or have hearing loss due to age or illness, developmental disability challenges, sensory disabilities. I know that enabling closed captioning on television is important for many people in our disability community. Many of my colleagues on the City Council and many people on the Disability Commission know our good friend Felicity, who was a passionate disability advocate before the city council hearings. And many of us, including myself, would talk with her about how important it is for television to have caption so that persons with disabilities can follow what is going on. And I know myself and many others would arrive early to the council meetings so we could talk to Felicity, who we had great respect for. And so I hope that we can discuss ways for the city and businesses to ensure that all of our residents, especially persons with disabilities, are able to access and understand information that is shared on public television screens. Thank you. And at this time, I'd like to ask my colleague and co-sponsor, Councilor Mejia, to provide an opening statement. Before I do that, Emily Rogers, I don't know if you have your hand up. Is there?
No, I'm just interpreting to American Sign Language. I don't have any questions. If I have a hand up, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Emily, thank you very much for being here. At this time, I would like to ask my colleague and friend, Councilor Mejia, who's the co-sponsor, to provide an opening statement.
Yes. Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for holding this hearing and for having our office sign on as a co-sponsor. We often ask ourselves as an office whenever we write something or post something or share something, are we communicating in ways that everyone can understand? It's one of the reasons why we filed an ordinance to create a literacy task force here in the city of Boston. And while we have often asked this question in regards to literacy or systemic racial and social economic barriers, we also think that it's more critically for us to be communicating with people with disabilities as well. We're grateful to have staff on hand and people throughout the city, including our clerk's office, who work on providing communication to people from different backgrounds and abilities, but we know we need to do better. I hope that we can walk away from this conversation with some marching orders to figure out how we can make sure that everyone has access to these spaces and that information comes to them in ways that can best reach them. And this, for me, I see this as an opportunity for information justice. We can't say that we are taking care of all of our residents if not all of our residents are able to understand and access information in a timely fashion. So I see this issue not just as information justice, but also civil rights, right? Like, this is important. We need to ensure that everyone is able to access information. So thank you so very much for allowing us to co-sponsor this alongside your office. And it's great to see Alex, and looking forward to hearing from our panelists and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. We're also joined by Council President Matt O'Malley. Councilor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be brief. Just really wanted to log on for this hearing to demonstrate and reiterate my support. Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for your incredible leadership. It's a very simple premise that we are affirming today, and it's simply that we need to do everything we can to make sure that our local government is accessible to everybody, full stop. And it can be certain policy changes that we're exploring here as it relates to translation, as it relates to sign language, as it relates to making sure that we have opportunities for every individual to not only participate, but be part of our conversations going forward. We ought to be doing it. So this is an important issue. Delighted to be here. I will not be able to stay for the duration of the hearing, but again, wanted to just, again, reiterate my support. And it's great to see so many colleagues and friends on the Zoom today.
Thank you, Councilor O'Malley. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I don't see any other colleagues just yet. If they do come, I will recognize them. But at this time, I'd like to start and open it up to the panel that is here from the administration. The panel from the administration includes Commissioner McCosh, as I mentioned, Commissioner Emily Shea, and Susan Helmley. So let me start by asking Commissioner McCosh, who I've known for many years and have great respect for her work in this field. Commissioner McCosh, thank you for being with us. And this is your opportunity to provide an opening statement. Thank you, Commissioner McCosh.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, Councilor Mejia, and Council President O'Malley for allowing us to hold this hearing today. We want to talk critically about the important issues of communication access in the City of Boston. As you know, I'm the city's Disability Commissioner and ADA Title II Coordinator. My role leads the city's collective efforts towards accessibility and inclusion. And the ADA requires certain levels of access, but we know we never strive to meet the bare minimum. We strive for ideal conditions in the city. So this hearing today focuses on inclusion. Although it's not mandated by any laws, we really want to push this forward so that we're ensuring that we have access and inclusion for all residents and visitors to Boston. Our mission is to increase opportunities for people with disabilities by facilitating full and equal participation in all aspects of life. This includes reducing architectural, procedural, attitudinal, and communication barriers in transportation, housing, employment, and civic activities. So I'm here today to begin the public discussion with you, the City Council, with disability advocates and the business community about this proposal from my office that the City of Boston require all public-facing TVs to turn on their closed caption function to ensure that people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and other marginalized groups will have access to the audible content on the TV. So with that, I do have a short slide deck I would like to pull up to show you some more information on this proposal. Great. So just to give a brief summary of the proposal, in order to increase communication access and equity for people with disabilities and other marginalized groups, my commission is proposing an ordinance that requires captions to be displayed on all TVs located in places of public accommodation. When businesses enable captions, a live transcript of the program's audio content is shown scrolling across the bottom of the screen. This will enable a significant this will eliminate a significant communication barrier for people with hearing loss and others by providing access to the audio content of TV in public places. This will also increase access to information for the general public because TVs are often located in noisy spaces where everybody may have difficulty hearing. Next slide. So this really came to light as an issue of equity during the COVID pandemic. The lack of communication access on TVs in public places has always existed as a barrier for those with disabilities and others. But the pandemic brought this striking inequity into a new light. Throughout the state of emergency, TV played a critical role in sharing information between residents, visitors, public health experts, and government officials. For over a year, TVs were broadcasting daily and weekly press conferences, public health updates, breaking news reports, emergency alerts, and other critical information and instructions related to the pandemic, also about the city's shutdown and its reopening. This renewed interest and necessity of TV broadcasts during COVID highlighted the disparity that exists for the disability community and beyond. We want to fix this. So our solution is to propose captions be required in places of public accommodation. As I said a few minutes ago, captions type out a live transcript of the speaker's conversations, so those who can't hear or understand the audio can still access the program's information. All TVs today come with equipped captions function. It's embedded in the hardware and software of every device. Captions are simple to enable, and this function only needs to be turned on one time. Then it will remain on until it's turned off. There's no cost to turn on the captions. Businesses do not need to pay for any service or sign up for anything or pay a fee for somebody to type out captions. They're all generated automatically today as a built-in function. And places that would require captions under this proposal would be restaurants and coffee shops, hair and nail salons, bars and nightclubs, gyms and fitness centers, sports and entertainment venues, hospitals and libraries, transit stations, small businesses, and City of Boston public buildings. And as I said earlier, this is really serving marginalized residents that go beyond the disability community. Of course, we know it will help people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And the capital D deaf, for those of you who may not know, signifies people who specifically use American Sign Language. They identify as capital D deaf. The small d deaf refers to people who may have lost their hearing at a later point in their lives and may not know American Sign Language. We know people lose their hearing due to age and illness. People with developmental disabilities sometimes have difficulty following conversations. This would help them. People with certain sensory disabilities and non-native English speakers. And so just to give you some data and background, how we hope to serve all of our residents. 18,457, or 3% of Bostonians, have a hearing disability, which they identify as having serious difficulty hearing. Approximately 1 in 3 people between the ages of 65 and 74 have hearing loss. Many older adults do not identify as being hard of hearing and don't realize that they would use the captions once they're enabled. Over 37,000 residents have a cognitive disability. And as we all know, our weekday population swells with commuters from across Massachusetts and New England, increasing the number of people who would benefit from this initiative. And Boston welcomes over 10 million visitors every year from all around the world. Many who have disabilities, are older adults, may not clearly understand spoken English, and we hope to be considered a world-class city and provide this equitable communication access. So in proposing this ordinance, my staff and I did a lot of research into other cities that already have this in place. The first one was Portland, Oregon, that passed the ordinance in 2015. Other cities include Seattle, Washington, Tacoma, Washington, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, San Francisco, Rochester, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's currently required in one state, the state of Maryland. And to talk a little bit about our proposal, we are proposing a city ordinance to make captions a requirement. And I cannot take credit for this idea. It was raised to us from one of our advisory board members, Wesley Ireland, who is a person who identifies as deaf and uses American Sign Language. He really brought it to us as an issue of equity and making sure that his community is able to have access to all the emergency announcements that were happening during COVID, as well as entertainment and enjoyment of TVs in public places. An alternative could be to create this as a requirement of part of business entertainment licensing under the licensing board. We haven't figured out any details on implementation yet, but we see it as being a phased-in approach, allowing us time to work with the disability community, local businesses, and other city departments to do outreach and messaging, provide information and instructions on how to enable captions. Importantly, we're not proposing any fines for noncompliance. Rather, we would work to create a formal complaint and resolution process modeled on the program in Maryland, where people file a complaint with the state civil rights office. We could work with either the city's Human Rights Commission or the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. And with that, we have been working closely with our interdepartmental colleagues. We are working with the Office of Economic Development, the Licensing Board, Age Strong Commission, Human Rights Commission, the Law Department, Health and Human Services, and the Office of Language and Communication Access. And we know that moving forward, we would certainly loop in the City Council, we'll loop in ONS to make sure that the neighborhood businesses know all about this. And we see it, like I said a minute ago, as a phased in, layered implementation. So just to summarize again, throughout the COVID pandemic, TV broadcasts were really highlighting critical information. And to have this not available to a decent segment of the population really seemed unjust and inequitable. It became instantly apparent that none of this information was accessible to people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or other marginalized groups when they were in public places. And this is because captions are not typically turned on in TVs that are located in business and restaurants, gyms, libraries, even hospitals. And some of the other city ordinances have this done as a requirement by request. If someone requests the captions to be turned on, we're asking to make it automatic for two reasons. So it doesn't put the onus on the person with the disability to have to ask. And secondly, if someone is deaf, they may not communicate verbally, and it may be a challenge to them to communicate their request in American Sign Language. If people in a restaurant or a gym don't use sign language, they wouldn't be able to communicate that very easily. And also, we don't want to put wait staff in that position. We know they're busy doing their own work, and we don't want to have them go looking around for a manager to ask to turn on the captions. So we talked about the other cities, and we really hope to follow their lead in creating this proposal. And again, just to reiterate, is our strong belief that requiring captions will benefit disabled and marginalized communities without adding any financial or administrative burden to businesses. So with that, I will end my opening statement and pass it back to Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Commissioner McCosh, for that excellent presentation. Well done to you and your team and other city departments. It's something I support 1,000%. And we have great respect for your office, Commissioner, because you advocate and you work hard to make sure disability rights are civil rights, and that everybody is treated with respect and dignity. So thank you, Commissioner McCosh. At this time, let me ask Commissioner Shea of Age Strong Commission if she would like to provide opening statement.
Thank you so much, Councillor. Actually, Commissioner McCosh is speaking on behalf of the panel today. Susan and I are here because we are obviously fully in support of this, and we're also available to take any questions when we get to that portion of the hearing. Thank you. Okay,
excellent. Thank you, Commissioner Shea, and thank you for your work too, Commissioner, in representing persons with disabilities and our seniors as well. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Susan, for your tremendous work. So at this time, maybe I'll ask my colleagues to go into Q&A with you, and then we'll ask the community panel to testify as well. So let me open it up to Councilor Mejia, and then I'll have Councilor Braid and then myself for questioning. I'll go last, but I'd like to open it up to Councilor Mejia at this time for Q&A.
Yeah, thank you. And it seems like Commissioner McCosh has given us the marching orders, so let's get it done. But I just have a few questions for the administration. I'm just curious. I've noticed that there are some press conferences or city meetings that have ASL interpretation and others don't. And I'm just curious, what are the city guidelines for providing ASL interpretation? And is this something that we can implement more permanently on the city council? And I just want to give a shout out to the ASL translator who is here with us today. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to enabling visual captions for deaf/hard of hearing folks, what can we do for residents who cannot read English and could read in another language? So I'm just curious about what that will look like. And then when we get to the community panel, I can ask some questions for that.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. So to talk about your first question, ASL interpretation at mayor's press conferences. We know the city pivoted almost instantaneously from having 1 or 2 mayoral press conferences a month to daily press conferences, sometimes more than once a day when COVID first struck. So we worked closely with the press team and with the Mass Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing to ensure that we had ASL interpreters for all the emergency press conferences that the mayor held. We were successful throughout the state of emergency. We had them at every single press conference. It really took a Herculean effort on our part. It took a lot of our staff time. It took MCDHH doing a lot of juggling for us, and they were really willing to work with us and partner with us. So we were really proud of that accomplishment. However, we knew it wasn't sustainable. So one thing that I'm very proud of my office that we're doing is we're using our ARPA funds to hire a full-time in-house ASL interpreter. It will be the first one for the city of Boston. We currently have that posted. And when we get this person on board, they will be able to do any press conferences that come up. Like sometimes there'll be breaking news that the mayor may want to respond to, and we don't have time to get a sign language interpreter. So once we have this position in-house, they can do the mayoral press conferences. They can do people who come into City Hall just for services. They can work with all the other departments. They can work with City Council if you need it at any point. And Councilor Flynn, I do also want to reiterate our respect for Felicity Lingle, who was a cherished advocate in our community who recently passed away. So to answer your second part of the question, Councilor Mejia, about people who speak languages other than English, most TVs do come with Spanish captions embedded in the device as well. And we don't know exactly the other capabilities of translation, but we will work closely with Jennifer in the Office of Language and Communication Access to be sure that that's part of our program moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. At this time, I would like to ask Councilor Braden if she has any questions, and then Councilor Flaherty, who has also joined us. But Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councillor Flynn. I think this is a great idea, and so thank you, Commissioner McCosh, for your very thorough presentation. In terms of implementation, it seems like this ordinance is sort of almost ready to go. Are there any particular revenue cost implications with getting it out? Would there be a complaints procedure for community members who are not, when they see that this is not available to them? Those are the two questions I have.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. So the proposal and content is pretty much ready to go. But that being said, we haven't worked out the implementation or the complaint resolution process. We are not proposing any fines, but it may take some funding to do outreach to the businesses. We feel like we have a really good connection with the disability community. So we want to take plenty of time to get the word out to our community. Businesses, we're not directly in contact with as much, but we work with economic development. We work with the licensing board. So we would have them reach out to Main Streets and licensing board when they do entertainment licenses that include TVs. They could do outreach, and also neighborhood services to get in touch with the small, like mom and pop shops who may not be connected with a larger agency, to get this type of information. We want to emphasize that we are very, very cognizant of the struggles that restaurants and small businesses have had for the past 2 years, and we don't want to add any financial or administrative burden. So there'll be no cost to the businesses. It will be a phased-in approach over many months. And again, maybe some funding to do outreach and create some tools. My office does have a small grant to use for outreach, so perhaps we could use some of that money to create flyers and get information out to the businesses.
That sounds good. Excellent. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Braden. Councilor Flaherty is also with us. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Councilor, and obviously thank the commissioners for being here. Thank you for sponsoring, for chairing the hearing. It's an extremely important issue for not only those who have certain disabilities, but for all of us in government that have an obligation to ensure that important information is disseminated and shared in ways that are accessible to all. So the hearing is obviously very timely. Councilor Braden just asked a couple of the questions that I had that Commissioner McCosh had just answered. And basically, are there any adverse impacts on businesses to enable the open captions? How can we best incentivize or encourage businesses to do so? And also, I was just curious as to if not having open captions, if that's a violation of ADA law. I'm just curious on that. And then obviously, as Commissioner McCosh just mentioned about sort of, I guess, what type of messaging or awareness campaign can we undertake to make sure that, more businesses know how important this is.
Thank you, Council Flaherty. So in drafting this ordinance, we did a lot of research on the other cities that I mentioned, and they did report some complaints from businesses. The biggest complaint seems to be on sports programming, that the captions scrolling at the bottom would go over some of the scores, and that patrons would be annoyed by that. I don't know necessarily that any patrons were annoyed or complained, but I know business owners did express worry about that. So that would be something that we could work through. And again, I'm not sure if you were on for my whole presentation, but we are not proposing any fines for noncompliance. We are proposing a formal complaint and resolution process to work with the businesses either through the Human Rights Commission or through the Mass Commission Against Discrimination. And then other than that, there really weren't many complaints that I found. One thing I did see when I was doing research, but I didn't get to verify, was that the FAA, I think that's the agency, mandates open captions in all airports. And you can understand that because that's critical information for people traveling around the world, especially if there were like breaking news about some sort of threat that people would need to be made aware of. So I thought that was that shows the importance of this initiative. But we definitely want to work closely with the businesses to ensure them that there are no fines. It's a simple process, and to work with them around the sports programming, because just anecdotally, I read about that and I can see how that would probably be the biggest issue. And then again, if there are some like smaller shops that have old TVs and they don't have this function, then we would have some sort of like grandfather clause or something like that. Again, none of the program details of implementation or complaint resolution have been figured out yet. We just wanted to float the idea out, and we really want to hear from the businesses, and I'm hoping some of them are here today. We did reach out through Main Street's Economic Development and the Licensing Board to notify them of this hearing. And even if many of them aren't here today, we will do a lot of messaging to talk about this initiative before we actually do any implementation. And currently right now, I do not believe it's a violation of the ADA to not have captions in place. One of my advisory board members has signed up to testify today, and he serves on the FCC Committee for Accessibility, and perhaps he can speak more to that.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for the work that you do. I see that you're on the opposite side of the harbor from our hometown, so hopefully the weather in East Boston is good today. And thank you, Councilor Flynn, for chairing, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the testimony.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And I don't have any other colleagues on now, so I'll ask my questions. So I always use this as an opportunity to educate the public that might be watching on television, Commissioner. So, and I know you referenced it as well about the sports program, but what do you think is the number one obstacle or reason why a business might be against it?
Yeah, another thing I did read in the research from other cities is that some businesses expressed a resentment of government reaching into their business, which I do understand. There are a lot of regulations to opening a business. I know Boston is very thorough with its fire code and all its building codes and its ADA codes, and we're grateful for that. And they're a necessity there. It's non-negotiable. This is a negotiable. It actually is negotiable to request people to turn on captions, but like we said, really leading the way as a world-class city. We know we have people from all around the world who come to Boston. And I know just anecdotally, again, my mother just turned 80, and she said that when I told her about this idea, she said, "Oh, now that you say that, I realize I always read the captions, but I would never think to request them." So we really think it's going to help people who wouldn't even know it would help them. So we know a lot of people with developmental and cognitive disabilities may have trouble following along a conversation, but if you can see the words, sometimes it helps people who are visual learners and people who access communication visually. And one thing too, like you mentioned, to educate the public about, people may not know, I explained a little bit about the capital D deaf community. Another thing that we like to educate people on is that ASL, American Sign Language, and captions are not interchangeable necessarily, because people who are deaf with a capital D, who typically are born deaf and grow up using ASL, they don't necessarily have the same command of the English language as people who are hearing would. ASL is their first language. English would be a second language. And then conversely, with captions, sometimes people will say, well, we're not going to do captions, but we're just going to have an ASL interpreter. But that doesn't work either, because people who get older and may lose their hearing, they're not suddenly going to learn American Sign Language. They are going to need to read the transcript. So it is important to separate the two. ASL and captions are not interchangeable. They both serve a specific need. And regarding Council Flaherty's question about ADA requirements, that is why we do try to ensure that we have ASL interpreters for mayoral press conferences, because we want to make sure that as a government entity, we are in compliance with the ADA in providing communication access for people who are deaf as a disabled group of people, communicating with them in their language. I hope that was helpful.
Yes, Commissioner, it was very helpful. Thank you. I also think it's important for us as a city, but as city councilors as well, to make sure that we also work with your team in educating the public of how important this is and how beneficial this will be to people that are deaf and hard of hearing. And it's about dignity for persons with disabilities, to make sure that they're able to follow the instructions on the television as well. So I think the public outreach process will be critical, and I'm willing to work closely with your office and with city officials to make sure that we provide the best public awareness and education to residents as well. So thank you, Commissioner. So at this time, if it's okay with your team, Commissioner, I was going to go into the community panel and give them an opportunity to testify. And then we can kind of have a discussion from there. I'll try to coordinate it, but let me give the community panel an opportunity to testify at this time. As I mentioned, we have Bill Henning, who's the Executive Director for the Boston Center for Independent Living, Lori Seldman, who's my Ombudsman, Director of Deaf Services, Disability Policy Consortium, Wesley Ireland. As you mentioned, Commissioner, Wesley was the person that brought this to your attention and to your team's attention. So thank you, Wesley. Wesley's with the Boston Disability Commission, the advisory board. And Alex Gray, who's a disability advocate throughout Greater Boston. So at this time, let me ask Bill Henning if you would like to provide an opening statement. Hi, Bill.
I know Bill was invited, Counselor. I don't see him in the list. He may have gotten pulled into another meeting.
Okay, that's okay. Thank you. Well, let me go to the next person. I know she's here. Lori, it's good to be with you. Lori, I think you're on mute.
Hi there, I'm Lori. Okay. I'll be using American Sign Language today.
Okay.
So I am a deaf person, and yes, it's very important to have closed captioning on television, especially when we go to public places. And if there's no closed captioning on the television, we don't know what's going on. Other people who are out in public have the advantage of knowing what's going on, but we do not, and that is a barrier. And that's one challenge for me, is that I don't know what's going on the news with sports, anything for entertainment. I mean, I mean, entertainment doesn't really benefit too much, but it's not equal access. And I want everyone to have an equal experience for the whole deaf and hard of hearing community. So that way, if someone goes out, they have the ability to access anything that a hearing person would be able to hear on the screen, especially news, because it's important for us to be abreast of what's going on. It needs to be fully accessible for the deaf community to know what's going on. So that way it's accessible for all. It's a daily living need. And when I'm at home, I have the closed captioning on, but some people don't even have a television at home, and they go out to a public place so that way they can get access to the television. So that's another key reason why we would need captioning out in public.
Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Lori. It was very good. At this time, let me ask Wesley Island to testify. Hi, Wesley.
Hi there. Good afternoon. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much to Commissioner McCosh for your presentation. I'm so happy that this day is finally here. And again, thank you to Commissioner Flynn and Commissioner Mejia and O'Malley, as well as Commissioner Flaherty and everyone who's here on the call today and hearing about this docket 0908. And I'm just so happy that this is finally being brought to the table. I have lived in Boston here for almost 20 years. I came here for college, and I was born deaf, learned American Sign Language a little bit later in life. And I can say that closed captioning is very important. It's been a huge, important component of my life, and I'm very grateful that it is available to me. It's really interesting to see that in public places for the last 40 years that the captions haven't been on. And I have so many stories to tell. I love going out to restaurants, bars, going out celebrating. And I can tell you the frustrations that the closed captions have never been turned on for me. I've had a few instances where I have asked managers to put on the closed caption for me as a patron in their business, and they said that they would not. And a lot of times it was, as Commissioner McCosh was saying, because of sporting events that they were saying that the captioning was blocking the scores. And I felt humiliated in front of my friends when they told me no. And at that time, I didn't know what I should do. But another big example that I've had in my life, on this coming Sunday will be the 11th anniversary of a death in Boston. And I remember I was sitting at the bar with my girlfriend, who's actually my wife now. And I remember there was breaking news on the television at the bar. And I remember it was what was going on here in Boston. And I was trying to follow what was happening with the case. And I said to my wife, I said, tell them to turn on the closed captioning. And I remember that they were able to quickly turn on the closed captioning for that segment. But I remember that it can be very stressful. In that situation, I remember feeling very stressed. So that way, you know, when there's breaking news and we don't know what's going on and we have limited access, it's very stressful. And I would like to ask the city councilors to really consider going ahead and passing this docket. I am happy to take any questions that people may have for me at this moment as well.
Thank you, Wesley, for your testimony and for the important leadership you provide in our city. At this time, let me go to Alex Gray for opening statement or comments. Hi, Alex. Alex, I think you're on mute.
Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilor Flynn, for gathering us, and Councilor Mejia for your leadership on this. Thank you to City Council President O'Malley, Councilor Braden, Councilor Flaherty for your interest and your leadership on this issue, and to Commissioner McCosh for all of the great work that she does and her team on a daily basis to improve the lives of people with disabilities in Boston. You know, I think often that when government's at its best, it's playing the role of showing people that they matter. And I think this is a clear example of how we can do that as a city. You know, for people with disabilities, obviously the work continues to show that on a daily basis, but you know, we do that on a daily basis in a number of ways. You know, we can do this through providing ramps and elevators to those with mobility impairments, you know, audio signals at our street corners, letting us know to cross and which street to cross, and by putting captions in our public facilities where televisions are shown. And, you know, this will not only improve the, you know, roughly 1 out of 4 adults in America that have disabilities, but it also has a way of improving the lives of everybody. You know, even in myself, recently, we welcomed a child into this world, and I can't tell you, you know, how aware I am as somebody who has a disability. I'm blind. I was naive to the mobility issues that so many faced in terms of navigating parts of our city. So, you know, I think it's really important that we continue these types of conversations because it allows people with disabilities to interact and engage throughout all aspects of our city. And I think it's also important because people with disabilities have a very valuable perspective to add to our city, but it's very hard to add the perspective if you don't have all the information that you need. And I think, you know, this has been brought up. Information has been so important always, but most certainly over the last year and a half during the pandemic. And, you know, people with disabilities provide so many perspectives. You know, we are people of great empathy. The world certainly needs more empathy now than it's ever had. We are a highly adaptable and innovative group of people. I think oftentimes we don't always get included in the conversations when we talk about, you know, innovation in our world, but folks with disabilities are innovating on a daily basis. And, you know, I think by the work being discussed here to provide and share more information, it just allows folks with disabilities to continue to be a bigger and bigger part of the conversation. So, you know, I am so happy to be here and happy to take any questions, but just really grateful for the City Council for their interest and leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for your testimony and your leadership. We also want to say thank you to ASL English interpreter that's also here with us, Lisa. So thank you, Lisa, for being with us as well. I know I initially mentioned that Bill Henning was joining us, but I see another gentleman, Andy Foreman, who's from the same group, Boston Center for Independent Living. Andy, do you want to provide an opening statement?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm kind of, I guess, pinch hitting for Bill. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Traditionally, TV audible content has been inaccessible for people with disabilities. And the last speaker talked about improving the lives of people with disabilities. That's what the Boston Center for Independent Living is about, improving the lives of people with disabilities and creating an equal footing and access to information, especially now, but access to information in general is very, very important. And we should encourage we should encourage businesses to turn on their TV content and make sure that everything is accessible. It eliminates a couple different obviously the major barrier of communication access for all people with disabilities, whether it's people who are deaf with a capital D or people who are deaf with a small d, people with hearing loss, whether it's due to age or disability, people with sensory disabilities or any kind of developmental disability. And just the access to information for everyone in the city of Boston is really important. And I'm so glad for the work of Commissioner McCosh and just this bill and thank you very much for the opportunity to make a presentation.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for being with us. At this time, I'm going to go back to my city council colleagues, ask them if they have any questions for the community panel. And then after that, we'll see about public testimony as well. So at this time, I'm going to start with Councilor Mejia. Councilor Mejia, this is for the community Q&A presentation.
Thank you, Councilor Flynn, and thank you to the community members for your testimony. I'm just curious, our office has had to read through some of the older transcripts of meetings, and we found that they can be hard to read, not only because of the software used to record the dialogue, because we know it can make mistakes, but because the way we naturally speak always doesn't convey information clearly. We tend to speak and run on sentences and trail off at the end of ideas. And so I'm just curious, what recommendations do you have to make these transcripts / captions more useful to people?
Thank you for that question. I'll just jump in. I think that a lot of captions right now are generated through AI, and sometimes AI has difficulty with people's names in particular. And like you said, sometimes accents can get in the way. I know I have a very strong Boston accent. Sometimes my words don't come out correctly on the AI. Some platforms have better AI than others. And we always turn to our advisory board to get their input. I know they prefer, say, like a Zoom over a Google Chat for the automated captions, or vice versa. I can't remember right now which is which. But I think as technology improves, that will always get better and better as we move forward. I probably can't answer specifically what we'll do right now, but I'm glad that you raised that. And I think we will obviously take that into consideration and look for a way to make transcripts and captions reflect the actual conversations that are happening.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Braden is also with us for this community panel Q&A. Councilor Braden.
Thank you, and thank you to all the community members who have testified this afternoon. I think the COVID experience over the last 18 months has forced us to modify our use of technology, and I'm just curious in terms of community access to public meetings that may be, city related meetings like BPDA meetings or whatever. Are there particular improvements that you would suggest with regard to accessing Zoom, or are there particular shortcomings with the technology you use right now? I know when we have a crisis, it always forces us to innovate and improve things. So now that just this moment, I'm trying to capture this moment when you're all together. That have you any, just from your experience, have you suggestions how we might improve things for remote meetings so that we can improve community participation? Thank you. It's slightly off topic, but I'm taking this opportunity to ask that question to you folks. Thank you.
I see Wesley has his hand, and I think Alex wanted to speak. So let me go to Wesley, and let me go to Alex after that. Wesley, would you like to respond to Councilor Braden?
Yes, this is Wesley speaking to the sign language interpreter. Great question. And I can say with this pandemic, there's been so many changes, yes. And I think with captioning, when you talk about Zoom or Microsoft Teams, it would be really nice to see real live captioning where a person is actually listening and captioning it rather than the AI. And so I do hope that it will get better, but from my perspective, it's a benefit to have both the ASL interpreter and the captioning functioning at the same time. And because I may miss something in one mode of communication and grab it with the other, if the interpreter's missed something, then the captioning's following it and I can still follow with that or other way around. So there's a benefit for me. And so I recommend both captioning and an ASL interpreter functioning at the same time. So that's basically my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Wesley. Alex, would you like to respond to that too? I think you're on mute, but go ahead, Alex.
Thank you, Councilor. No, Wesley raised some great points. I would say that, I have run some meetings during COVID with folks who are in the deaf and hard of hearing community. And I know that similar to the way that this meeting is being run with, having a moderator call on folks and sort of having one person speak at a time is something that's very helpful in terms of for folks trying to follow the conversation. I know that, to Wesley's point, having the option of either American Sign Language or closed captioning is very important. I know for folks, this is slightly off this direct topic, but folks who are blind and visually impaired, if folks are presenting a PowerPoint or if they are providing any sort of visual things in the center of the Zoom, to maybe either ideally before the meeting for those signed up or maybe with a follow-up after, just to send an attached document of the, PowerPoint or what have you. And, this is just a 10,000 foot view question. I think just generally speaking, when invitations are being sent out for any meetings, to just have a blanket statement. If you need accommodations for this meeting, reach out to, so-and-so at, boston.gov or what have you. And I'm sure for most on this meeting, that is the case, that this has already been in place. But I think I read something not too long ago that somewhere, I think it was more than 85% of organizations don't make that simple statement within their invitations to meetings. So some of that I think is directly on topic with this meeting, and some I think is a little more broadly to your point, Councilor Braden.
Thank you, Alex.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Braden. I'm just looking around to see. I don't think any other colleagues are on just yet. So let me ask a question to the panel. How do you think city officials, whether it's myself and the city council, the mayor, Commissioner McCosh, and other city officials, what's the best way to engage residents across the city? What's the best way to engage businesses across the city about enacting such a proposal, educating them on this proposal, and implementation of the proposal? So I'll stop there, and if some of the people from the community panel might want to answer that, just let me know, and I can call on you. Okay. How about you, Alex? I'll put you on the spot.
Thank you, Councilor. I appreciate it. I would start with, we do have a great, as I said, disability commissioner, and she has a commission working under her that, I know that represents a variety of disabilities and a variety of neighborhoods. I think that's a first starting point. I think, communicating with the agencies within state government that represent the disability community, they tend to have very large, communication chains. I know as somebody who's blind, the Mass Commission for the Blind is often a place that I receive information. Working through the nonprofit channels, Boston Center for Independent Living is a great organization, Disability Policy Consortium. So, I would say, starting first with those channels, partners within, city government, state government, and the nonprofit. And then, I would also just work out through the list that I'm sure ONS has, if not your offices have, with neighborhood groups, if they'd be willing to pass it out through the various civic associations and what have you. And lastly, just social media is obviously becoming more and more important. So those are a few ideas, Councilor.
Thank you, Alex. And I know we can go to the public testimony, but before I do that, I just wanted to ask Commissioner McCosh one question before we go to that. Commissioner, what type of outreach would be needed, or what type of engagement would we need to do with Boston Public Schools? Certainly many of the students, this would benefit many of the students. It would benefit many of their parents as well. What do you think about how can we engage the public schools on this important outreach initiative?
Yeah, that's a great point, Counselor. I know when I was growing up, we didn't have TVs in the classroom, but I'm sure it's something that's common today. So yeah, it would be a great learning tool for students. I know the BPS has a very active and engaged SPED PAC, the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee. So I could see working with them. We work very closely with the Special Education Department Director, Masha Fitzpatrick, and we do a lot of programming with BPS Special Ed, but just getting the word out more broadly, working with Superintendent Casilius. And one thing that other cities have done, which I can imagine us doing, is put together like a cheat sheet of how to turn on captions for businesses, and then put together like not really a cheat sheet, like a one-page flyer, and then conversely making a one-page flyer for public institutions like hospitals, schools, and libraries, and then a one-page flyer for the disability community to know about this initiative. So I think that we can do a lot of messaging, a lot of emails, just talking about the benefits of it and about the availability, and working closely with all the groups to ensure that it's a successful implementation.
Thank you, Commissioner. At this time, I was going to go to public testimony, if that's okay. So, Chantel, could I ask people if they could, if there's anyone that wants to offer public testimony, if they want to raise their hand, or let us know through email or. Chantal, I think you're on mute. I just want to see if we're able to take any public testimony, if there is any.
Hi, Council. Are you referring to me, Chantal?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Chantal. I meant to say Cora. I apologize.
Okay, no worries.
I apologize. Cora, do we have anyone that's waiting to testify from the public?
I see Andrea Burns and Julie Bussman. That's unintended, but they did not request the link, so I don't think so.
Council, we did have one advocate who signed up to testify, but I don't see him
okay.
meeting, so perhaps he could send written testimony.
Yes. If anyone wants to testify, they can also testify in writing as well to the committee, and I'll make sure that every city councilor receives a copy of the written testimony. Cora, I'm not sure if you were trying to speak.
No, I'm all set. I don't think we have anyone else, Counselor.
Okay. So having gone through the public testimony, no public testimony, but gone through the community testimony and the administration that has testified, I'm going to probably go to closing statements. And let me start with Commissioner McCosh as a closing statement, and then I'll go to my city council colleagues before we end the meeting, if that's okay with everybody. So, Commissioner McCosh, would you like to offer closing statements?
Sure. Thank you again, Council Flynn, and thank you all to the city councilors who attended the hearing today. I really like the way Councilor Mejia frames this as marching orders, because that means that we get to take action on this initiative. So I'm excited about that. So I think our next steps will be to, I really do want to loop in businesses because I don't want this to come as a surprise to them. So I think moving forward, we'll work with Alex and Economic Development, Main Streets, the licensing board, to really reach out to our businesses in the city. And then we will work on internally our programming ideas, try to map out what implementation will look like, create a formal complaint and resolution process, and really start to move the initiative forward. Maybe even pick a launch date that we think would be important and coincide with an event that may be happening in the city or in the disability community, so we can work towards that goal. I know we have a big celebration every year at ADA Day. That's in July. I don't know if we want to wait that long to implement it. It's November, but we can certainly see. So I think we have our marching orders, as the councilor so aptly described, and we will move forward with it, beginning with the businesses and then circling back to the disability community and our internal partners.
Thank you, Commissioner McCosh, for your important leadership in this city on disability rights. We're lucky to have you here. Let me go next to my colleague and co-sponsor, Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you all for participating today, and I really do appreciate Commissioner McCosh's idea of bringing in the businesses, because oftentimes things are being done to us without us, and that intentionality around bringing them in could really help inform the conversation in terms of some of the barriers they may face, and will most definitely set us up for greater success if they have some input in what this would look like moving forward. And so really appreciate that that idea moving forward. And now, I'm here for all of it. And so let's make it happen, and let's bring people into the conversation. And as we start thinking about this, Commissioner McCosh, I think that, some of the immigrant-owned businesses, like who are only Spanish speaking or Haitian Creole, Vietnamese, Mandarin, I think it's really important for us to think about the depth of diversity that exists here in the city of Boston, and that bringing them into the conversation. And I also think even some of the barbershops and hair salons, I always talk about them because they also serve the public. So let's really think about who are all the types of businesses that we should be including in that conversation. And I'm happy to help brainstorm, or at least introduce you to some of the businesses that we've been working with during COVID, if that helps. And thank you again for your leadership, and looking forward to partnering alongside you and my colleague, Councilor Flynn, to move the work forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. And I think Councilor Mejia mentioned the critical immigrant community in Boston. So that's an important part of the discussion as well. So thank you, Councilor Mejia, for bringing up our immigrant neighbors across the city. That's very important. And I just wanted to say I'm honored to have chaired this meeting with my colleague, Councilor Mejia. And this issue is personal to me. I have a nephew who's a teenager now, but he has very difficulty walking, and he's not able to speak, and he has development challenges. So I think of this type of initiative that you guys are sponsoring is something that would benefit him, but also benefit people throughout the disability community. And so I'm very honored that you came forward with this. And this is about respect and dignity for persons with disabilities. And there's nothing more important in the city than making sure that persons with disabilities are treated fairly, with empathy, with respect and dignity. So I just want to say thank you to everybody that's here for your testimony, but more importantly, for the incredible work that you have done for so many years in this field. I haven't been involved in this field all that long. I'm active with the Disabled American Veterans, and we do a lot of outreach to disabled veterans across Greater Boston, across Massachusetts as well. But just so proud to work closely with you. And as Councilor Mejia said, we have our marching orders and we need to work together to try to get this implemented. I also want to say thank you to the City Council Central staff for your assistance. Cora and Kerry, thank you for helping. I want to say thank you to the ASL interpreters that are here as well. So at this time, I'm going to call this meeting, I'm going to have this meeting adjourned, but we'll come back in terms of a follow-up meeting, maybe in a working session at some appropriate time. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.